Hold on to your butts. These are the Squashbuckler Diaries. Welcome back. My name is Guy Hasson, and you are listening to the Squashbuckler Diaries podcast, the daily epic fantasy podcast about Joy Shelley, the girl who lives in dreams. We are in episode 6 of an arc that's actually an adventure, that's actually dangerous for Joy Shelley, which doesn't happen often in the Squashbuckler Diaries. It's mostly about her life. So I think we should get right into it, and later on, let's talk a little bit about fantasy, okay? So, first of all, let's see what happens next. I will not tell you what happened before. This is episode 6 of this arc, so go back a few episodes, listen to it. It'll be fun for you. Okay, let's go. Episode 189, In the Land of the Giants, Part 6, Waiting. Joy's age 4.5, told by the Red Dragon. "No, Dad, over here, no!" Dragondale shouted at Bunny's revenge as it flew down and into the giant's forest. She was lost in the forest of the land of the giants. Her father didn't see her and went to look for her in the wrong place. Dragondale, her body bruised and hurt from being swatted by a giant a day ago, jumped up and down on a gigantic leaf she was standing on. She did not fall from the top of the gigantic tree. I've rarely seen Dragondale lose her balance in all the time I've known her. Dragondale sat at the edge of the leaf, about to slip down. She stopped. She stood back up, looking at where she had seen Bunny's revenge. Nothing. She moved to the edge of the leaf. She pursed her lips and stood back. I believed I knew what was going through her mind. Years ago, when I had just come into Dragonfather's dream, I saw him explain to Dragondale what to do if she was ever lost. She should go to a place where she could easily be seen, and she should stay there and wait for as long as it takes until her father finds her. As much as she wanted to go down and look for Bunny's revenge, she resisted and stood on the leaf. She stood there for hours. A little girl, so full of energy, so ready to take charge, stood on a giant leaf for 5 hours without a single sign of Bunny's revenge. She bit her lips. She squeezed her hands. She jumped up and down. She screamed. She walked in circles on the leaf, but she did not leave it for 5 entire hours. And then the forest shook. But I will tell you more of what happened next tomorrow, told by the Red Dragon. Hashtags: Joy, Justin, Bunny's Revenge, The Land of the Giants, Joy lost, Joy alone, Joy doesn't fall. By the way, there is a hashtag called Joy Doesn't Fall, so if you go back, even if you're just, in the present, and we are in episode 189, there's a few Joy Doesn't Fall hashtags, which you can find at the website. Just look for Joy Doesn't Fall, the hashtag, and you will find a few stories, and you can go back and listen to those podcasts or just read them at the website. But if you're in the future, there's going to be a few more of those. Joy Doesn't Fall. I just thought it'd be interesting. It's an interesting hashtag. She is 4.5 years old, after all, and 4.5 is not the age where the Joy Doesn't Fall hashtag started. In any case, we need to know what happened next. It is important that Joy, 4.5 years old, bruised, battered, without water, without food, without her father for now more than 24 hours, does not leave the leaf. She stays there because that's how he taught her to survive. Will that help her survive? That's a good question, because she's a small, even smaller than a leaf. Anyway, I told you I'd talk about fantasy. So this is an epic fantasy podcast, an epic fantasy story. And one of my friends, an editor, who used to publish a lot of my stuff way back when I was writing a lot of stuff that wasn't for this, put in question on Facebook. He's trying to write some kind of article, and he asked for the hive mind to tell him, like, what do you think is the thing that makes fantasy fantasy? Like any kind of fantasy, urban fantasy, any kind of fantasy. And lots of people wrote in a lot of ideas. You have to have good and evil. You have to have ultimate good and evil. You have to have a quest. You have to have a hero's journey. You have to have all kinds of stuff. But I told him the only thing that makes fantasy fantasy is that the premise is fantastic. It comes from fantasy, or it doesn't have to be fantastic. It could be just something that's usually thought of as fantastic, like fairies, dragons, stuff like that isn't explained by science. So, like, if we choose dragons, but the dragons are genetically engineered, that's not fantasy, that's science fiction. But if we just have a world of dragons that isn't, say, from another, universe where there are dragons, or they find a planet of dragons, where it isn't explained scientifically, it's fantasy. If you have something crazy like this, a girl born into the dream, the dream isn't actually, as far as we know, and I don't think it is, one place where, I won't tell you all the rules of the dream, but basically Justin wakes up and there's that place, a dream. It's not just in his mind, right? Because there's a girl in it and she's alive when he's gone. And stuff stays behind because he's gone. So this is a fantasy. It's not a scientific thing. However, most fantasies have the ability for, like if you do magic stuff or anything, you can keep inventing rules as you go along. Oh, I have a magic spell for this new thing that happens at the end that wasn't there at the beginning. That also happens a lot in fantasy. It doesn't happen a lot in good science fiction. I come from writing science fiction, so I like to establish all the rules in the beginning, and then I just have to use those rules in the end. And I create a lot of questions in the beginning, and then I solve them with information you already have. I don't invent something new. I don't give you a new magic kind of thing. I don't say, oh, there are rules I didn't mention, by the way. It was all there in the beginning. In the middle, saying. About 2/3 of the way in, you stop learning new stuff and you use the old stuff. Those are my rules, and those are the rules of usually science fiction authors. Not all of them, but many of those I grew up on. So I write fantasy under the rules of science fiction, even though it's fantasy. And this is an epic fantasy, not because it has a big quest. So far, there's no quest. You don't know, maybe there'll be a quest later on, right? But it's epic because it covers her from birth to death. And there is a story, and it does have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And it is all about one thing, or mainly one thing. It's about many things, but they all fall under the category of, being lost in dreams. And I won't say more than that, because we're not even in the first chapter of the story. We are in the prologue. The first chapter of the story happens at age 6. So these Squashbuckler Diaries and the Lost in Dreams book are fantasy. They're epic fantasy, but they're not your usual fantasy thing. Also, it's not usual because you've noticed that the structure is very different. So we'll get more into that over time, but that was the editor raised an interesting point. The people gave very interesting answers, and I thought I would give you my view of things and of fantasy, especially in regards to the Squashbuckler Diaries. So, what happens to Joy? We find out more tomorrow in episode 190, in an episode called Dad versus the Giants. And now, the credits. The Squashbuckler Diaries are written and read by me, Guy Hasson, All the tags mentioned in this story are searchable at the website. You can find all the stories there in written form and, in fact, 150 Squashbuckler Diaries more. The Squashbuckler Diaries is the diary of Joy Shelley, the girl who lives in dreams. She'll be called the Forgotten Girl by her father. She'll be a true heroine. She'll change the world. This project shows her entire life from birth to death. Check out the website at guyhasson.com. That's GUYHASSON.com. I've been an author and a playwright for more than 30 years, and this is the first time I've used the guyhasson.com website, because The Girl in the Dream is my life project. If you have questions, if you want to comment, please do. You can comment at the website or email me at guyhasson@gmail.com. That's GUYHASSON, GUYHASSON @gmail.com. The theme music is called Brass Gentleman and is created by Thomas Harudek. My name is Guy Hasson, and this is my life project. Come back tomorrow, and tomorrow, and tomorrow for more.